Hi everybody, today I am going to walk you through another corset alteration tutorial. So this is a long line underbust corset that was donated to me by a friend, and it is quite damaged in the center front here. There are two busk loops that are actually bent, and then there is some fabric damage right here in the middle part. There is some fraying. I'll show you a close-up before I actually get started. So if you have a corset that you can't wear because the busk is damaged or broken, whether you have missing busk pins and you don't know where they went. By the way, I did do a repair tutorial for busk pins that had popped out if you want to look at the tutorial right up there. But if that's not an option for you, or if say the actual bone of the busk itself is broken and you can't find a busk that is identical in size, so it would be difficult to just replace the busk with a new one, then I am going to walk you through a tutorial on how to replace the busk with front lacing. This would also be good for people who have trouble tying their corsets in the back. A lot of people ask me if they're able to just turn the corset around, have the busk in the back and the laces in the front. Unfortunately not, because the corset more often than not should be drafted to you so that it holds the tummy flat, all the bones converge to the center front there. You won't have that in the back, and also if your corset is drafted to support a lumbar curve, then it's going to cause strange points of pressure on your body if you're not wearing it the right way around. However, if you just take out the busk and you replace it with front lacing, you can keep the back laced all the time, and then you can just open the front, slip the corset on over your head, and lace it in the front if you find it more comfortable that way. So I think that's a long enough introduction, so let's get started. And this is how the corset looks after the alteration. So if you're interested in seeing how I did this step by step, then just keep watching. Okay, so here's the corset, and if I show you a close-up, so you can see that the first two busk loops are fine, then this one is quite badly bent. Now, if you wanted to just straighten that out, you could theoretically just take a pair of pliers and just flatten it as best as you can, and that would be functional, as long as you're gentle and you don't actually break it off. Some people actually have broken off busk loops in the past, and you can see that this one is a little bit bent as well. On this side, you can see that there is actually some damage to the fabric right there. It's actually frayed and it's ripping out in that direction. So instead of just straightening out the busk, I decided that I'm just going to remove it and replace it with some front lacing. First, I removed the binding from the center front panel on the top of the corset. On the bottom of the corset, I removed the binding from the first two panels, as I'll be shortening the corset on the bottom in the center front and rounding down that point. Then I started to remove the busk. Unlike with my last tutorial, I decided to remove the center front seam instead of the anchoring seam, since this busk is not going back in again. If I retain the center front seam on both sides of the corset, then the loop side will pretty much look okay, but then the holes from the knob side of the busk will remain visible, and it will be a bit of an eyesore. Also, I wanted to hide the damage to the center front where the fabric had started to fray. This is only on the knob side of the busk, but whatever you do to one side of the corset, you should also do to the other side in order to maintain symmetry. Please note that this method only works with a corset that actually has a center front seam and with a corset that has an extra wide busk to begin with. We're going to be folding the busk channel down, essentially turning a 1-inch channel into more of a 1/2-inch channel. So if you start with a corset with only a 1/2-inch wide busk, then you will need to remove the anchoring seam on the opposite side in order to ensure your center front boning channel is going to be wide enough to hold the bone. Also, if your corset doesn't have a center front seam, but merely just one piece of fabric that wraps around, there's a possibility that you'll have to cut through this in order to complete the alteration properly. Alright, so when we're finished taking the busk out, you should have something like this. So that seam is open, but this other seam is intact, and this is going to be the new seam for our boning channel. Now, the reason that I decided to do it this way instead of taking out this seam is because of these little holes right here left over by the knob side of the busk. Can you see the light shining through that? Let me take a piece of chalk and show you. There's a hole, there's a hole. So I don't want those holes to show up in the final product. And so I want to hide these holes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold this underneath, and I'm going to do the same on the other side here. And this is going to become my new boning channel. And if I do this correctly, then the holes should be trapped within that little seam allowance that's folded under, and this will become the new boning channel for the flat steel bone that's going to be on the outer edge of the grommets. And I'm going to add another boning channel here to support the other side of the grommets. Before I get to making my new boning channel, I decide to cut down the point at the bottom of the corset in the center front. I had to remove a couple of adjacent bones to do this, and I did this the same way that I showed in my last alteration tutorial, so I won't go into too much detail about this. Then I used my French curve here to mark out the new bottom edge, just tapering it off so it gradually meets the pre-existing edge by the third panel of the corset. I do the same on the other side, and I put the two sides together to make sure that they'll be symmetric. After I cut down both sides of the corset, I checked for symmetry again. Now I'm folding the center front seam inward and pinning it in place. I measure along the seam to make sure that the channel is 1 centimeter wide all the way down. Then I go into the other room to iron it, which helps keep the fold crisp while I sew it. This was difficult because the iron can't be so hot that it melts the poly brocade, yet it can't be too cool that it doesn't do anything at all. Using a silicone plate or a pressing cloth may help, but I also found that this brocade is just really slippery even when it's pinned in place. So after that fiasco, I use my narrow foot to sew 2 millimeters away from the new center front edge. This means that my channel is now 8 millimeters wide, which will be perfect for my heavy 5.5 millimeter wide bones to fit in snugly while not twisting in their channels. Then I switch to my regular presser foot and I stitch more lines down, which will become the channels that hold the grommets. So for that particular channel, I make sure that the channel is pretty much exactly the same width as the grommet. It's not going to be too tight that it doesn't allow the grommets to be set properly, and also it's not going to be too large that it will destabilize that grommet area and cause them to rip out. And then the second channel is going to be my other boning channel, so that the grommets will be sandwiched with bones on both sides. After that, I re-sew the binding on the top edge. I leave the bottom edge open for now since I still need to put the bones in. Now I'm measuring the boning channels. In this situation, it's 11.25 inches, so I subtract 3/4 of an inch from that measurement to get the length of the bone I need. So I need to make my steel bone 10.5 inches long. Remember that of the 3/4 inch I subtracted, half of that inch will be used up when I put the binding back on, and then there'll be another 1/4 inch left. I place the bone so that it has 1/8 of an inch on top and on bottom of the channel. Cut the flat steels with your bolt cutters or aviator snips, and then grind the sharp edges down using a file like this or a bench grinder like I showed in my last tutorial. Make sure you tip the flat steel bones and do this however you like. So as I said, I prefer PTFE or Teflon tape, and then put the bones back into their channels. Now it's time to put the bottom binding back onto the new edge. So I pinned it in place and then cut off the excess binding since the bottom is now shorter than it was before. When doing the same to the second half of your corset, remember to frequently check for symmetry so the binding matches up to the best of your abilities. After that's finished, it's time to put in the grommets. I mark out my grommets and make sure that my markings are right in the center of the channel. Here I'm using my C-Step 2 machine, which pierces a hole and sets the grommets in one step. It's not as safe as using an awl to stretch the hole, so ideally you should use some extra precautions when using a machine like this, like making sure that the fabric in the grommet panel is reinforced, and also setting the grommets closer together than you might usually set them. You can also hit each spot with fray stop and then let it dry before you insert the grommet. But I love using this machine, especially for experiments, mock-ups, and floating modesty panels because it's so fast. Once you're done with the grommets, you can lace up the front. Here I'm doing a decorative lacing in pink in the front, and then you can also lace it up the back. So here I'm using the same black cord this corset originally came with and just lacing it in the typical bunny ears method. So after I made a modesty panel, just to make sure that my abdomen wouldn't show through the front laces here, this is what it looks like in the front and also in the back. So you can see now that the front is laced a little bit open, I have space to actually lace the back a little bit more closed, so that modesty panel is covering everything in the back there as well. So you can use this in a couple of different ways. You can have the center front completely closed if you want. You don't have to make a modesty panel or anything. And you can use the back laces how you usually do, or you can do it the other way around. You can have the back completely closed, and then you can use the front here for controlling the cinch and the reduction. Just remember when you are doing that to use the bunny ears method, because it gives you a little bit more control and cinch. I just did it this way because I think it looked really nice and decorative. So do be aware of a couple of different things. Remember that when you do this alteration, you're going to lose a little bit of the corset size. So I found that I lost half an inch on each side, so this corset is a full inch smaller than it was when I originally started, in the underbust, in the waist, and in the hips. So just be aware of that sort of thing, and if you need to add hip gores or rib gores or anything to make it fit a little bit better, go ahead and do that if you want. Also see that I made this center front a much more shallow curve here, so I like it much better than the dramatic point that was there before. I find it more comfortable when I'm sitting down, and I think it's aesthetically nicer as well. So I hope you enjoyed this little experiment slash tutorial. If you did find it useful, then please remember to click that like button and help support the channel. If you have any comments or questions about this alteration, or you have requests for future alterations, please feel free to leave a comment down below. I'd be happy to get back to you, and I'll see you on Friday for the next review. Bye!